Robert had always possessed a clear vision for his life. In his prime, he was a man of immense physical and professional stature, a natural leader whom the neighborhood looked up to. His success was not just measured in the size of his house or the luxury of his cars, but in the respect he commanded. He built his enterprises with honesty, dealt with people with generosity, and lived a life that felt grounded and honorable. He was a pillar. At home, he was partnered with Clara. She was a spectacularly beautiful woman, sleek, stylish, and accustomed to the comfortable life Robert provided. He remembered their wedding day, a blur of white lace and bright sunlight. Clara had stood before the altar, her voice ringing out with the sacred promises to cherish him, to stay by his side in sickness and in health. Robert had never doubted her sincerity then. Her ambition for luxury was matched only by what he believed was her ambition for a happy life with him. For 10 years, their life together was a landscape of affluence. Robert worked hard, and Clara spent well, ensuring their home was immaculate and their social life vibrant. He loved watching her entertain, loved the way her laughter drew attention. He saw her pride in him, the quiet satisfaction she took in being the wife of Robert, the successful businessman. He took for granted that her love was intertwined with his identity as a provider and a whole man. They had a sprawling, well-appointed house, manicured gardens, and a garage filled with high-end vehicles. Every piece of furniture, every painting spoke of Robert's financial strength. He was the anchor, and Clara was the bright, beautiful sail. He believed their partnership was unbreakable, forged by prosperity and secured by commitment. The idea of illness or setback was purely theoretical, belonging to the distant, unlucky world of other people. He never considered how fragile a marriage built on comfort could be. That theoretical world shattered in a sudden, brutal instant. It happened on a Tuesday, late in the evening. Robert was on his way home from closing a major deal, the city lights reflecting off his windscreen. He was mentally composing a speech to thank Clara for her unwavering support. The rain had begun to fall heavily, turning the highway into a dangerous sheen. He saw the headlights of the lorry too late. The driver had lost control completely, turning the massive vehicle into a projectile. The force of the impact was like being struck by a collapsing building. There was a terrifying crunch of metal, the shriek of tires, and then the sound of his own body breaking. The next thing Robert knew, he was enveloped in agonizing pain and a terrifying, profound darkness. He had survived the accident, but his vision had not. The hospital stay was a grueling period of pain, confusion, and despair. Robert underwent multiple surgeries, his body stitched back together piece by piece. His physical injuries were extensive, but the most devastating damage was to his head. The doctors were grim-faced when they delivered the final verdict. The trauma had caused irreversible damage to the optic nerve. Robert was permanently blind. The strong, vibrant man who relied on his sharp sight to command boardrooms now existed in perpetual night. The world of color, shape, and light had been replaced by a suffocating void. He spent months recovering, learning to navigate the simple tasks of eating and sitting up in a world without edges. The rhythmic beep of the monitor was his only constant companion. Clara was initially present. She held his hand, read him scriptures, and cried genuine-looking tears. Robert held onto her presence like a lifeline, believing her fear was his own. He was grateful she stayed, interpreting her continued visits as the fulfillment of her vow. "Don't worry, my love," he whispered one afternoon, his voice weak. "We will get through this. I will adjust. We will hire help." "Of course, Robert," she replied, squeezing his hand, but the pressure she applied was too hard, almost resentful. His return home was a logistical nightmare. It took 3 men to help him navigate the entrance, his once familiar house now a dangerous maze. The scent of furniture polish and Clara's expensive perfume was overwhelming. He heard the click of her heels, a sound that used to denote elegance, but now sounded impatient. He was placed on the large sofa in the living room, a cane resting uselessly beside him. He felt the soft, familiar texture of the upholstery, yet he could not see the room he owned. He was a stranger in his own domain. In the darkness, his other senses sharpened. He heard the careful distance in Clara's voice when she spoke to the nurses. He noticed the long periods of silence when she was supposed to be near, realizing she had left the room without a word. He was no longer the imposing pillar, he was a liability. The shift in his identity was immediate and crushing. As he struggled to pour himself a glass of water, missing the mark and soaking his trousers, the shame washed over him. He was reduced to fumbling, dependent movements. He sat there, blind and soaking, waiting for help, acutely aware that the successful Robert was dead, and the new helpless Robert was an object of pity. The facade of care Clara maintained dissolved quickly, melting away in the face of the permanent reality of Robert's blindness. It started with small omissions, forgetting to replace his glass of water or leaving the television blaring at full volume, knowing the noise irritated him without the distraction of visuals. Then came the heavy, dramatic sighs. Whenever he asked her to guide him to the bathroom or fetch the book she had just put down, she would let out a long, loud exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of the entire world. The sighs were meant to communicate a single, unambiguous message: this is a burden. Robert, deeply ashamed of his dependency, tried to minimize his needs. He learned to count his steps to the kitchen counter. He listened for the hum of the refrigerator. He moved slowly, cautiously, feeling his way along the walls like a child. He tried to remain quiet, hoping his stillness would somehow restore peace to the house. But his silence only seemed to invite her cruelty. One afternoon, he was trying to fold a shirt that had been left on the arm of the sofa. His fingers struggled with the fabric, creating a crumpled mess. He heard Clara enter the room, her voice bright as she spoke on the phone. She ended the call quickly when she realized he was still struggling. "Robert, what are you doing?" she demanded. "Trying to fold my shirt," he mumbled, his face hot with embarrassment. "Oh, for God's sake," she snapped, snatching the shirt from his grasp. She folded it perfectly in 2 swift movements and slapped it down beside him. "You know, it's not just your sight, is it?" she said, her voice dropping to a low, vicious whisper. "You've become utterly useless, a dead weight." Robert flinched. The words felt like a physical blow. "Clara, look at you," she sneered. "You sit there, day in and day out, like a statue. A whole man now, just a block of wood. What use are you to me now? I married a provider, not a sight for pity." The sheer venom of her words left him speechless. He sat rigid, his hands gripping the cane. He wanted to argue, to remind her of his wealth, his success, and the vows she had taken. But the words lodged in his throat, suffocated by the shame of his current state. He could not fight back without seeing her face, without meeting her eyes. In the darkness, he felt powerless. Clara, satisfied with the impact of her cruelty, adjusted her dress and walked away, her steps confident and quick. She had finally expressed the resentment that had been hardening in her chest, and she seemed lighter for it. Robert remained on the sofa, the meticulously folded shirt resting beside him. He reached out and touched the smooth fabric. It felt like a monument to his failure. He pressed his knuckles to his temples, trying to push back the encroaching reality. He was not just blind, he was trapped inside a marriage that was now a cage of contempt. He missed the simple ability to see her face, to determine if the malice in her voice was real or if it was just a moment of frustration. But the sound alone was enough to confirm his terror. The love was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp bitterness. The insults escalated quickly, transforming the house from a place of quiet neglect into a constant theater of cruelty. Clara decided she could no longer tolerate the slaving, and so Mia was hired. Mia was a humble girl in her mid-20s. She had traveled from a distant village to the city with the sole purpose of finding work to support her younger siblings. She was quiet, respectful, and moved with a careful, almost silent grace. From the start, Mia became an essential part of Clara's performance. Clara didn't just want to degrade Robert, she wanted a public audience for his helplessness, even if that audience was only the maid. Mia was forced to witness every verbal abuse, every calculated humiliation. Clara used Mia as a tool of shame, ensuring that every request Robert made went through a filter of mockery. "Mia!" Clara would shout, loud enough for the neighbor's gardener to hear. Mia would rush from the kitchen, her apron tied neatly around her waist. "Yes, madam. Come and help this useless man before he starts crying like a baby," Clara would announce, gesturing toward Robert, who was usually sitting perfectly still. "He wants to move to the study. Go and drag him there. Look at him dragging himself around like a blind worm." What a sight! Robert, hearing the casual savagery of her words, would instinctively pull his head down, wishing the darkness could swallow him entirely. The humiliation was profound. He needed help, but the cost of asking for it was his dignity. Mia, her expression a careful mask of obedience, would approach Robert. She would speak softly, her voice low and respectful. "Sir, may I take your arm? Please hold my elbow." She never treated him like a child or an object. She always waited for his verbal consent. When she took his hand or guided his elbow, her touch was firm and steady, without the grudging impatience Robert had grown used to from Clara. Robert often tried to avoid Mia's gaze, knowing what she was witnessing. But sometimes when he reached for her arm, their hands would brush. In those fleeting moments, he would tilt his head toward her, listening closely to the way she breathed. He sensed in her presence a profound pity, yes, but also a quiet, steady reverence for his past self. When she spoke, he heard the respect he desperately craved. It was a respect that acknowledged his pain, but never lessened his identity. Clara, watching from the doorway, would smirk. She misinterpreted the genuine human care Mia showed as mere service. She didn't understand that kindness was a commodity more valuable than the gold she coveted. One day Robert fumbled for his glass of water, knocking it over and soaking the rug. Clara, who was polishing her nails nearby, just tutted. "Mia, clean up his mess. Honestly, the man is just clumsy," she said. Mia rushed in with a cloth. As she knelt beside the chair, cleaning the water, she leaned in slightly and spoke in a voice so loudly Robert could hear. "It is all right, sir. Accidents happen." It was just 6 words, but they were a balm to his shredded nerves. In the chaos of his shame, Mia was a small, silent sanctuary. She was the one person in his new world who seemed to possess the true sight, the ability to see the man, not the condition. Clara's cruelty was comprehensive, extending even to the simplest necessity of life. Food. Robert had once enjoyed lavish, elaborate meals. Now he was served remnants, cooked with malice. One afternoon Mia was out on an errand. Clara was left in charge of lunch. Robert heard her clattering pots in the kitchen, followed by a sudden, acrid smell of burning oil. When she came into the living room, she wasn't carrying a proper plate. She dropped a small, warped, metallic bowl into his lap. It was hot, cheap, and smelled foul. "Eat," she commanded. Robert reached out his hand and felt the contents. The rice was hard and brittle, fused together in a burnt mass. He picked up a spoonful and brought it close to his nose. The stew was greasy and distinctly sour, as if the meat had spoiled slightly. "Clara, this food is bad," Robert said, his voice flat. "It is food," she snapped, leaning over him. "It is perfectly good. Or do you think I have time to cook 5-star meals for a man who doesn't pay bills anymore? Be grateful." "I cannot eat spoiled food," Robert insisted, pushing the bowl away. Clara seized the bowl, her eyes glittering with rage. She marched to the kitchen and returned seconds later. "Mia, come here," she bellowed. Mia, returning from the laundry room, hurried in. "Take this bowl," Clara ordered, shoving it into Mia's hands, "and take it outside. I want you to sit on the porch and eat this. All of it, before you get your own dinner." Mia stared at the burnt, sour rice. "Madam, I don't understand." "I am showing you the kind of service your master is used to," Clara exclaimed, her voice theatrical. "He thinks he is too good for the food I make. Now you eat it, and if you don't finish every grain, you get no pay this month." Mia looked from the food to Robert, her eyes wide with shock and distress. Robert, hearing the desperate note in Mia's breathing, felt a surge of cold fury. Clara was now punishing the innocent just to amplify his shame. "Clara, leave her alone," Robert said, trying to rise, only to be shoved back by her hands on his shoulders. "Stay down," she hissed. "This is the price of his rudeness. Go, Mia, now." Mia, eyes lowered, walked outside with the bowl. Robert listened to the soft, distant scraping of the spoon against the metal. He knew she was forcing down the spoiled meal. He knew she was doing it for her family, to keep her meager job. He sank back into the sofa, the darkness feeling heavier than ever. He wasn't just enduring cruelty, he was watching Clara use his situation to corrupt and punish others. The sense of utter impotence was overwhelming. His vision was gone and his voice was gone. When Mia finally returned, she quickly washed the bowl. She walked past Robert, her face stained with tears, her stomach churning. Thank you, Mia, Robert whispered. She paused, then quickly nodded, unable to speak. That evening, Robert went to bed hungry, but Mia, using her own small lunch portion, secretly placed a small apple on the side table near his head, just within his reach. He found it later, cool and firm in the dark. It tasted like defiance. Clara's abuse was a relentless assault on Robert's spirit. The physical humiliations came next, designed to reinforce his status as a dependent, despised object. One morning, Robert was trying to prepare his own tea. He knew the location of the mugs and the sugar bowl. He carefully measured the hot water into the mug. But as he reached for the milk carton, his hand brushed against the sugar bowl, and it toppled over, scattering a white cloud of fine crystals across the polished wooden floor. Clara rushed in, attracted by the sound. She surveyed the mess, her mouth thin and tight with fury. "Look at this," she yelled. "Wasting my sugar, you blind fool." Robert shrank back. "I am sorry, Clara. I missed the—" "No, you are not sorry," she screamed. "You are just destructive. You waste everything you touch. My time, my money, my furniture." She grabbed the mug of tea he had just prepared. The water was near boiling. Robert heard the clinking of the porcelain. Before he could react, she lifted the mug and violently poured the hot liquid directly onto his lap and trousers. Robert gasped, recoiling from the sudden, scorching heat. "Ah, Clara, that's hot." She didn't flinch. She just stood over him, breathing heavily. "Maybe that will teach you not to waste my supplies. Get up, clean this mess." Robert, scalded and shivering, struggled to wipe the burning tea from his legs. The injury was minor, a bright red patch on his thigh, but the emotional scar was deep. It was pure, unadulterated malice. Later that week, Clara delivered the ultimate banishment. "You are not sleeping in the master bedroom anymore," she announced one evening. "Your restlessness disturbs my sleep, and your side of the bed smells like hospitals." Robert was confused. "Where will I sleep?" "The guest room sofa," she said curtly. "You can manage. It's better than sleeping on the floor, isn't it?" The guest room sofa was stiff and short, requiring Robert to sleep curled awkwardly on his side, his muscles complaining with stiffness from the awkward position. The marital bed, the symbolic center of their union, was now off limits. He was exiled. He was alone. Mia, who had been instructed to change the sheets on the guest room sofa, worked quietly. Robert heard her careful movements. He heard the rustle of the linen. "Mia," he said softly in the dark room, "do you think I am a bad person?" She paused her work. "No, sir. I think you are a kind man who is going through a terrible trial." "But I am a burden," he insisted. "I am helpless." "You are helpless only because she makes you feel that way," Mia said, her voice dropping. "You are the master of this house. Don't let her wicked words get inside you. Your legs are strong, sir. Your spirit is strong. She is the one who is weak." Robert didn't know how she knew about his legs. They were perfectly fine, just stiff from disuse, but her words were a lifeline. He began to think of the guest room sofa not as a place of banishment, but as his new post. He was wounded, but he was not broken. The greatest loss for Robert was not just his sight, but his connection to the world and his community. His spiritual life, once robust and public, became a source of acute shame. Sunday mornings were always difficult. He could hear the neighbors preparing for church, the sound of car doors closing, and distant, joyful singing. He missed the fellowship, the sense of being part of something bigger than his current darkness. One Sunday, Robert dressed meticulously in his old suit trousers and a clean shirt. He used the cane he rarely touched, moving slowly toward the front door. "Clara," he called out, "I am ready. We need to leave for the service." Clara came downstairs wearing a stunning, tailored dress, a wide-brimmed hat, and a fur stole. She looked like royalty. She stopped short when she saw him standing by the door. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked, irritation sharp in her tone. "To church," Robert replied simply. Clara stared at him. "Absolutely not. I am going to the 10 a.m. service, where everyone sees me. I am not taking you." "Why?" Robert asked. "I can manage the walk to the car. They have ramps." "Because it's embarrassing," she hissed, dropping her voice quickly. "I don't want to be seen parading the blind man around. People already talk." "It's hard enough maintaining my dignity as it is, Robert. Your condition is not my problem to display publicly." "My soul needs nourishment, Clara. he said, his voice rising slightly in protest. Then nourish it here, she said, grabbing her handbag and keys. God is everywhere, isn't he? Stay home, listen to the service on the radio, and pray I don't find a reason to divorce you when I get back. She was gone quickly, the roar of her car engine a loud final insult. Robert stood by the door for a long time, the polished cane heavy in his hand. He was completely abandoned, not just by his wife, but seemingly by the very community that once celebrated him. He eventually stumbled back to the sofa, tears of utter desolation blurring the internal darkness. He lay there, his faith tested to its limits. Later he heard the faint sound of the radio. Mia was cleaning the dining room, tuning the radio to a local station that was broadcasting a church sermon. She knew he couldn't see the tiny radio, but she knew he could hear it. As the sermon finished, Mia approached him cautiously. "Sir, may I read you something?" Robert nodded silently. Mia pulled a worn, dog-eared Bible from her apron pocket. She turned to the Book of Psalms. She read the 27th Psalm, her voice soft but strong. "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life, of whom shall I be afraid?" She continued reading, the powerful words of faith cutting through his darkness. When she finished, Robert felt a measure of peace return. "Mia," he said, "you are the only truth I have left in this house." "And you, sir," she replied, closing the book, "you are the kindest man in the world. Please hold on to that." The sanctity of their home was utterly destroyed when Clara began bringing her lovers into the house with brazen regularity. Robert's blindness made him a convenient, silent, and invisible fixture. He became the stage upon which their infidelity played out. The primary offender was Max. Max was crude, loud, and confident, his laughter echoing through the hallways Robert had once dominated. He smelled of cheap cologne and expensive cigars. Robert knew by the sounds of the kissing and the whispered endearments that Clara felt no shame in her actions. One evening, Clara and Max were sitting in the living room, drinking the brandy Robert had collected over years. Robert was sitting nearby, listening to an audiobook, trying to pretend he didn't exist. "You know, it's a shame about poor Robert," Max slurred, his voice dripping with false sympathy. Robert heard him, rise and walk closer. He felt Max's hot breath above his head. "Life is cruel, man. You've got the house, you've got the money, but you can't see any of it," Max chuckled, patting Robert patronizingly on the shoulder. "Ah well, that's why you need good people around you to enjoy things for you, right, baby?" "Absolutely," Clara replied, giggling. "He's fine, he's just background noise now. Don't worry about him, darling. He doesn't even know what we're wearing." They proceeded to flirt openly, their conversation punctuated by whispers and crude jokes about Robert's condition. Robert sat through it, his face rigid, the cane resting across his lap, feeling suddenly heavy and useless. He had never felt so violated. His private prison had been turned into a public show. That night, after Max left, Robert found the courage to speak to Clara when she walked past his sofa bed. "Clara, I can hear everything," he said. She stopped. "Good. Maybe that's the only sense you have left. I brought him here because I needed excitement. I needed a man who can appreciate me, not a man who needs a nurse." "I am still your husband," Robert insisted. "And I am still a woman who needs a life," she retorted, her voice hard. "You are my burden. You are in the way of my happiness. Do you know how often I tell people I'm only staying with you out of pity? I brag about it. It makes me look generous. You are nothing but my exhibit, Robert." She walked away, climbing the stairs to her large, empty marital bed. Robert lay there, his heart a hollow, bruised organ in his chest. But beneath the profound pain, something new was hardening. He realized that this was not a moment of weakness, but a moment of clarity. Her words, so ugly and true, stripped away the last pretense of their life. He now knew, without a shadow of a doubt, the depth of her moral bankruptcy. The test, he thought, had begun the moment he lost his sight. But the real failure belonged only to her. The cold reality of Clara's neglect reached its peak when Robert fell dangerously ill. A severe fever gripped him, leaving him shivering uncontrollably on the cramped sofa. He was disoriented, nauseous, and unable to manage his own needs. "Clara," he called out weakly, his throat dry, "I need a doctor. My head is pounding." Clara was on the phone, laughing loudly with a friend about a recent shopping spree. She glanced over at his trembling figure. "He's fine," she said into the phone, covering the mouthpiece briefly. "Just being dramatic. You know how blind people exaggerate everything. I will call you back." She ended the call and walked over, placing a cold hand on his burning forehead. "You feel warm. Probably just the flu. Stop being difficult, Robert. I am not taking you to the hospital." "Please," he rasped. "I think it's serious. I can't stop shaking." "And waste my money on some useless diagnosis?" she scoffed. "No, if it's your time, let him take you. I can't deal with the paperwork and the bills again. Just sleep it off." She left the house an hour later, heading for a salon appointment, leaving him alone and feverish. Robert felt the ultimate abandonment. His own wife was willing to let him die to avoid inconvenience. He lay there, sinking into the dark abyss of delirium. He thought about calling his lawyer, about exposing her now, but something held him back. He needed this proof. He needed her to commit the absolute worst offense. A cool, damp cloth was placed gently on his forehead. "Sir, I am here." It was Mia. "Mia, you shouldn't be here," Robert whispered. "She will fire you." "I cannot watch you die for the sake of 2 coins," Mia said with quiet force. She had found him while doing laundry and, seeing the severity of his condition, had ignored Clara's direct orders. Mia used her own meager savings to rush to the pharmacy. She bought fever reducers and malaria medication. She went to the market, bought fresh goat meat, and began to boil a medicinal pepper soup, the steam filling the kitchen with an aroma of healing. She nursed him diligently for 3 days. She gave him his medication precisely on time, wiped the sweat from his body, and forced the life-giving pepper soup down his throat. She spoke to him in gentle, reassuring tones, reminding him that he was strong, that his life had value. By the 4th day, the fever broke. Robert woke up, exhausted but clear-headed. Mia was beside the sofa, fanning him with a magazine. Suddenly, the front door burst open. Clara walked in, returning from her weekend trip, and stopped dead. "Mia, what are you doing? I told you to stay away from him," Clara screamed, her face contorted with rage. Mia froze, the magazine suspended in the air. "She was fanning me," Robert said, his voice surprisingly firm. Clara stormed over, her fury aimed at the maid. "You insolent girl! I told you if I see you near him, I will send you back to your village empty-handed. You are acting like his wife, cooking for him, touching him. Get away from him." Mia dropped the fan and ran from the room, tears stinging her eyes. Robert, however, knew what he had just witnessed. In his moment of near death, Clara had failed the ultimate test of humanity, and Mia had passed it with flying colors. He knew then that the time for silence was over. The fever was gone, but the clarity remained. Robert now had 2 distinct realities: the visible darkness he presented to the world and the bright strategic vision he held in his mind. A week later, Robert carefully guided himself into the study. He closed the door and locked it with the key he had memorized the position of. He felt his way to the heavy mahogany desk. He sat down, and then slowly he opened his eyes. The world rushed back in, the familiar lines of his leather chair, the spines of his old books, the thick Persian carpet. His sight had returned months ago. It hadn't been a miracle cure, but a result of a complicated surgery that had required months of complete stillness and dark rooms. He had recovered fully, his vision restored to 20/20ths. He had kept the truth hidden. He continued to use the cane, to fumble for objects, to rely completely on Clara and Mia. He had chosen to remain blind to see what others were truly capable of. He knew that when money and status disappeared, character was revealed. He had just adjusted the variable. Instead of poverty, he chose paralysis and blindness. The result was the same. Robert reached into a hidden compartment in the desk. He pulled out a large manila envelope. Inside were documents that detailed his enormous wealth, deeds for properties, investment portfolios, and accounts in Geneva and London. Clara only knew about the local bank accounts, which were nearly dry. He examined a framed photo on his desk. Clara, stunning and smiling. He saw the cold calculation in her eyes now. He remembered her words. "You are nothing but my exhibit." He remembered the scalding tea, the spoiled food, the refusal to call a doctor. He had watched Mia, too. He had watched her bring him an apple. He had watched her risk her job to save his life. He had watched her treat the useless blind man with more dignity than his own wife afforded him. He had seen the truth of her soul. Robert placed the documents back in the envelope, his fingers tracing the outline of the paper. Clara entered the study later, finding him exactly where she expected, sitting in the dark, touching the desk with his fingertips. "Still here?" she said, sighing dramatically. "I need you to stay in your room tomorrow. I have important guests." "More of Max's friends?" Robert asked softly. "That is none of your business," she snapped. "Just stay quiet. Your silence is the only useful thing about you." "Silence is deceptive, Clara," Robert said, his voice low and steady. "It can hide many things, even a truth that is waiting to explode. You think you are the conductor of this orchestra, but you are just playing a single, sour note. And soon, the music will change." Clara laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "You and your sermons, Robert, they can't give you your sight back. You are finished." She left the room, convinced her husband was a broken, harmless fool. Robert opened his eyes again, looking at the door through which she had just left. "Finished," he thought. "No, I am just beginning." The next day, Robert received confirmation of Clara's ultimate planned humiliation. Mia came to him, her eyes wide with fear and worry. "Sir, I heard Madam on the phone with Max," Mia whispered, leaning close to the sofa. "She is planning a huge party for Max this coming Saturday. She is celebrating his new contract, but she is telling her friends it's a celebration of her freedom." Robert nodded slowly. "What exactly did she say about me, Mia?" Mia swallowed hard. "She said you would be sitting there like decoration. She said you are nothing more than expensive, blind furniture that she is too kind to throw away." A cold calm settled over Robert. The line had been crossed. She had moved from private contempt to public calculated malice. "Thank you, Mia," Robert said. He reached out and gently touched her hand. "You have done everything you can." He spent the next few days in quiet consultation. His lawyers and his security team received coded instructions via his concealed phone. Logistics were planned and documents were prepared. The stage was being set for his last performance as the blind man. Clara was oblivious, consumed by her preparations. She hired caterers, decorators, and a DJ. She bought a glittering gold dress that screamed opulence. She ordered Mia around mercilessly. "Make sure his corner is clean, Mia," Clara instructed, pointing to a dark, remote spot near the back garden shed. "Put his sofa and his cane there. I don't want him bumping into guests. He must not be seen, but he must be present." Robert watched the transformation of his compound. The place that had once been his sanctuary was now being decked out for his funeral of dignity. On the eve of the party, Robert called Mia to his side. "Mia, I need you to do one last thing for me," he said, his voice serious. "Tomorrow I will be in that corner. I need you to stay with me. Do not leave my side. Do not let anyone pull you away. Promise me." Mia looked confused, but the authority in his voice was undeniable. "I promise, sir. I will stay." "And one more thing," Robert added. "When the music is loudest and she is laughing the hardest, remember this. The day she wants to laugh the loudest may be the day her shame will be loudest too." Mia stared at him, bewildered by the cryptic prediction. She didn't understand, but she felt a tremor of anticipation. The long, dark season was about to end. Saturday arrived, vibrant and sun-drenched, a stark contrast to the darkness that was about to unfold. By 5 p.m., the house was packed. The compound glowed with fairy lights and expensive decor. Max arrived, preening in a tailored suit, accepting handshakes as if he were the host. Robert was already seated in his corner, dressed in a plain, faded shirt and old trousers, his cane resting beside him. Mia stood faithfully at his elbow, a quiet sentinel in her simple maid uniform. Clara, glittering in her gold dress, was the picture of a host triumphant. She hung on Max's arm, laughing loudly, ensuring everyone saw their intimacy. The neighbors who had been invited watched in shocked silence, whispering about the sheer audacity of Clara's open betrayal. As the evening reached its peak, Max grabbed the microphone. The music faded. "To my beautiful Clara," Max declared, holding up a crystal glass. "Thank you for being my strength, my light, and my inspiration." Clara snatched the mic from him, her eyes shining with wine and victory. She looked out at the crowd, then deliberately aimed her gaze at Robert's corner. "To my real man," she proclaimed loudly, "to Max, who stands on his own 2 feet and who can see a bright future for us. And to Robert," she paused, her voice dripping with pitying contempt. "To my dear husband, who is here with us today, thank you for being the quiet, comfortable furniture." The compound fell into a heavy, agonizing silence. Everyone looked at Robert, waiting for a reaction, waiting for the blind man to cry, or shout, or simply break. Robert did none of those things. He placed his hands on the armrests of the sofa. "Mia," he said, his voice steady, "guide me forward." Mia placed a gentle hand on his arm, and Robert, moving with slow, convincing uncertainty, allowed her to lead him to the center of the compound, right in front of the horrified Clara and Max. "The silence is over," Robert announced, his voice clear and resonant, amplified by the microphone still in Clara's hand. "The humiliation has gone on long enough. Today the truth will speak." The heavy gates, which had been closed, suddenly swung open. 2 large, powerful black sedans pulled into the compound. 3 men in immaculate dark suits stepped out, carrying heavy leather briefcases. They walked straight through the stunned crowd, ignoring the host and hostess, and stopped directly in front of Robert. "Good evening, sir," the lead man said, bowing slightly. Clara's jaw dropped. "Who are you?" "My lawyers, Clara," Robert stated. "You thought I was poor. You thought the accident cleaned me out." He raised his voice. "I am not poor. I am a billionaire. I own the trust that owns this house, the land and the companies you thought had failed. I simply chose to hide my wealth to test the loyalty of my wife when she thought I had nothing left but a cane." The lawyer opened a briefcase, pulling out stacks of thick paper, deeds, bank statements, and investment portfolios. The crowd erupted in a roar of disbelief. Clara stumbled back, clutching her chest. "No. Robert, you are lying. This is a joke." "It is no joke, Clara," Robert corrected her coldly. "It is the truth you chose to ignore. You failed the test of poverty." Then Robert let go of Mia's arm. He dropped the cane to the floor, where it clattered loudly. He turned his head slowly, and his eyes, bright and piercing, swept across the entire stunned audience. He walked. 2 smooth, confident strides brought him face to face with Clara. "And you failed the test of sight too," he said. He looked directly into her eyes, a look that conveyed every moment of pain and shame she had inflicted. The crowd screamed. Some covered their mouths, others surged forward for a better view. Robert's vision was perfect. "I have not been blind for months," Robert announced. "I chose to stay in the darkness to see who would treat me like a man when I was at my most vulnerable. My condition was the test. My silence was the trap. And you, Clara, you have trapped yourself." Max, pale and frightened, immediately backed away, melting into the crowd and heading for the gate. He didn't look back at Clara. Clara sank to her knees, her glittering dress gathering dust on the pavement. She began to cry, but her tears were selfish, fueled by the spectacular loss of wealth, security, and pride. Robert turned from her, his attention focused solely on the young woman standing faithfully beside him. "Mia," he said, taking her hands. Mia was weeping openly, tears of relief and shock streaming down her face. "When the whole world, including my wife, saw me as trash, you saw a human being worth saving," Robert said, addressing the hushed crowd. "You, Mia, with nothing, showed me more loyalty and kindness than Clara ever did with everything." He looked at the crowd. "From this day forward, Mia is no longer a maid. She is my partner, my love, and my wife." He held her close, letting her cry into his shoulder. Clara began screaming from the ground, her makeup running, begging him to forgive her. "My enemies have finished me. My enemies." Robert looked down at her one last time. "No, Clara, you finished yourself. You are responsible for your own disgrace." He left the final warning to the shocked guests. Never judge people by their temporary condition. The wicked will fall, and those with good hearts will always rise. Then Robert walked out of the compound, fully sighted, fully restored, holding Mia's hand. He was free of his disguise, his cruel wife, and the prison of humiliation. Clara remained on the cold, dirty ground, the wreckage of her pride scattered around her.